Thermal Comfort. Written and presented by me, Jean Leguay. Here's the legal stuff. So, thermal comfort. This is the official ISO definition. And it says, the condition of mind that expresses satisfaction with the thermal environment. The condition of mind. Our core temperature is the temperature inside the centre of our body, our core. We need to keep our temperature around about 37.5 degrees Celsius. Up and down by, say, 36.12 to 37.8. But that's the temperature we need to be at, so that all the little chemical reactions can take place correctly. If we start getting too hot, for instance, we start having a few problems. If we get to 38, that's classed as hyperthermia, if it's not caused by a fever. You feel hot, you sweat, you're thirsty, you're very uncomfortable, slightly hungry. If it's caused by a fever, you may have the chills. 39 degrees, severe sweating, flushed and red, fast heart rate, breathless. You may be exhausted. Children and people with epilepsy are very likely to have convulsions. 40 degrees, fainting, dehydration, weakness, vomiting, headaches and dizziness. Profuse sweating. This starts to be life-threatening. 41 degrees, this is a medical emergency. We're only a few degrees above 37, but 41 degrees is a medical emergency. Fainting, vomiting, severe headache, dizziness, confusion, hallucinations, delirium, drowsiness. You may also have palpitation, breathlessness. 42 degrees. You may turn pale, or you may be flushed red. You may be comatose. You'll have severe delirium, vomiting, convulsions. Blood pressure may be high or low, but your heart will be racing. 43 degrees. Probably dead. If you're not, if you make it, you'll have severe brain damage. There'll probably be continuous convulsions and shock. Cardiorespiratory collapse may occur. 44 degrees, you're dead. People have survived hotter than that. Some people have survived 46.5 degrees, but they were really, really sick afterwards. Now let's see what happens when you go down. So 36 degrees. You feel cold, mild shivering. This is where your body may drop to during a sleep. It may even be your normal body temperature. 35 degrees. Hypothermia. Intense shivering, numbness, bluish greyness of the skin. Heart irritability. 34 degrees, severe shivering, loss of movement in fingers, blueness and confusion, behavioural changes. 33 degrees, moderate to severe confusion, sleepiness, depression, progressive loss of shivering, slow heartbeat, shallow breathing. You may actually stop shivering. Subject probably unresponsive. 32 degrees. This is a medical emergency. 5 degrees less than normal medical emergency. Hallucinations, delirium, complete confusion, extreme sleepiness, progressing to comatose. No shivering. They may even feel hot. No reflexes. 31 degrees, comatose. Shallow breathing, slow heart rate. 28 degrees, severe heart rhythm disturbance. May appear dead. 24 to 26 degrees, dead. Now, funnily enough, your body does have an automatic reaction to getting very, very cold, and you do go into sort of like a suspended animation. So even though somebody might appear not to have a heartbeat, if they're very, very cold, they can be resuscitated. It's been known to happen even hours afterwards. Now, heat and cold, hot and cold and comfort, it's all in the mind. The parietal lobe in the cerebellum is what's called the somatosensory region. It's a small section within the parietal lobe where you perceive temperatures. Below the conscious processes of perceiving warmth and cold, there's subconscious processes related to thermal comfort that are part of the autonomic nervous system and the endocrine system. These two systems act together to coordinate the functions of the body. The first part we need to look at is a little part of the brain called the thalamus. The thalamus sits there at the top of the spinal cord. It's like the gatekeeper to the brain. All the impulses coming up and down the spinal cord have to go through the thalamus. The thalamus is very closely related to another little beastie called the hypothalamus, which literally means located below the thalamus. It's inward behind your eye sockets. It's described as the operator of your internal thermostat. The internal thermostat itself is known as the pituitary, and it's connected to the hypothalamus. It's the hypothalamus, a sugar cubed size organ, along with the peanut sized pituitary, which controls your core body temperature. The hypothalamus is also involved in controlling emotions like anger, and it also regulates your danger response, how daring you feel. So these three parts, the hypothalamus, the pituitary and the thalamus, or the HTP axis as it's called, regulate your body's response to temperature. Okay, so I'll come clean. I'm not expecting you to memorize any of this stuff or regurgitate it. It's just a bit of background just to let you know how complicated the whole thing is. Okay, so this is how it works. The hypothalamus tells the pituitary gland, which is your thermostat, it gives it a hormone which is called thyrotropin releasing hormone. A hormone is a chemical, so thyrotropin releasing hormone, we call it TRH. This is like turning up your thermostat. TRH is taken in by the pituitary gland, and that then releases chemicals to the thyroid. The chemical is called thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. So this TSH comes out of the pituitary and goes to the thyroid, which is a butterfly-shaped organ located alongside your windpipe just below your larynx. The thyroid releases iodine-based thyroid hormones T3 and T4 into your bloodstream. These are, well, you can think of them like the accelerator and the brake for your metabolism. They control things like blood flow, digestive processes, respiratory rate, and muscular activity. The release of energy is done alongside a process called thermogenesis, which raises the basal metabolic rate, of which heat is a byproduct. So this is thermogenesis. One of the actions of thermogenesis is to stimulate the muscles which pull up the hairs in your arms. So these muscles literally pull the hairs straight, tiny little muscles, and it creates an air pad, an insulating layer of air, which in theory should warm you up. So one way we can regulate our body temperatures is by what's called either vasodilation or vasoconstriction. The vascular vessels, they're the tiny little blood vessels that run near the surface of your skin, for instance. When we vasodilate, we open up those blood vessels and the blood runs near the surface. When we vasoconstrict, we close up those blood vessels and the warm blood is kept in the body core. When you are exposed to the cold, those little blood vessels close up. It vasoconstricts. This reduces the heat loss because it takes the blood away from the surface. It results in strong cooling. But then, if you take the blood away from the skin, then the skin will start to die. So every 5 or 10 minutes, the blood vessels suddenly reopen and we get a big flush of blood to the skin to keep it alive. Now, if you look at this picture, this very cold child has just gone through a vasodilation. And what's happened is the blood has rushed to the skin and they get that nice rosy-cheeked glow. We always take pictures of people when they look cold with rosy cheeks because it looks nice, because when they're vasoconstricted, they look grey, and that doesn't look very nice at all. So we go through these constant cycles of shutting off the blood and then occasionally flushing it through, and then shut it off and flush it through again. So there's two places where we measure our temperature. The internal body temperature is measured at the pituitary, where it's measuring the blood temperature basically in the centre of the brain. In addition to that, around the skin, there's 165,000 temperature sensors. The thermoception, or temperature sensors, sense heat and the absence of heat, or cold. Or rather, they actually sense the flow of heat, the rate at which heat is flowing out of the body. It's normally out of the body. There are specialist receptors for cold and for heat. So there's receptors that feel the body getting colder and receptors that feel the body getting hotter. The heat receptors are sensitive to infrared radiation. The thermoreceptors in the skin are quite different from the hypothalamus temperature sensors. The nerve endings aren't distributed evenly through the skin, but are concentrated in certain areas, like your feet, your ankles, your calves, your hands, your wrists, your neck, your face, and your head. Another place where heat control can take place is in what's called brown adipose tissue. Now this is a special, adipose just means fat. This is a special type of fat, and babies have this type of fat, and basically in brown adipose tissue, sugar goes into these brown adipose tissue cells and it just produces heat. Most of us lose our brown adipose tissues, but some people retain it. And these lucky people basically never get fat because excess sugar and fat is just burned up and turned into heat. So here's a quick diagram to show what happens when you get too cold. So when you get too cold, there's a decrease in temperature. The skin receptors measure a decrease in temperature. So we do various things. There might be some voluntary responses. We might put some clothes on. We might curl up. We might go running or start eating. Our teeth may chatter. Chemicals come out, T4 and T3, from the thyroid, which tells our base metabolic rate to increase. Our base metabolic rate is the speed at which our internal engine runs. We may vasodilate or vasoconstrict. That happens in rhythm. Brown adipose tissue might start burning up extra sugar to give us heat. All of these things we might do when we're too cold. So what's this basal metabolic rate then? Well, a study in Scotland recently showed that it is the rate at which we burn energy. And it showed that it varies between a low of, say, 4,000 kilojoules per day to a high of about maybe 10,000 kilojoules per day, with an average of around about 6,000 kilojoules per day. Most of that was found to be due to differences in the fat, basically whether you were fat or not. The rest of the differences were explained by sex differences. Some adults with lean body mass have a higher basal metabolic rate. Now, whether the high basal metabolic rate causes them to be thin, or whether being thin causes a higher basal metabolic rate, well, that's a subject for an argument. So you basically, like I said before, your basal metabolic rate is the speed at which your internal engine is running. Now, when you get too hot, you respond indifferently. When a body is too hot from the sun or from a fire or whatever, we do some various things. So the skin says that the temperature is increasing. That's how we define hot. So we might do some things to cool ourselves. We might fan ourselves, remove clothing. We might rest. We might start sweating. We might drink a cool drink. These are the sort of things that we do when we're hot. Now here, this is one of the main things we do, of course, when we're hot. We sweat. Some fabrics, polyester and nylon, conserve the heat and create more perspiration, as compared with cottons, linens and silk, which allow us to sweat. So you're better off wearing a cotton shirt than a nylon shirt if you're really hot. Caffeine, alcohol, onions, garlic and capsicum can trigger sweating in humans. Basically, if you eat something which is spicy hot, you react as if you're hot. Actions. We may do various actions. Here's a specialized action. This kangaroo is licking its arms. It's licking its wrists, which then evaporates off the wrists and causes cooling. So in summary, when we get too hot, we vasodilate and we maybe do some things. We sweat and that sort of thing. When we get too cold, we maybe vasoconstrict and vasodilate, and we shiver. Now, before I talk about heat, I'd like to explore what we mean by hot and cold. The thalamus and the pituitary are also closely linked to another part of the brain called the amygdala. They all work together in a very low level, behind the scenes way to govern how we respond and interpret basic inputs. Now, what gives away this is the language. Our language, the words we use, give away how we interpret things as hot or cold. So what makes us feel hot or cold? Well, firstly, being hot. Temperature hot makes you feel hot, and being temperature cold makes you feel cold. But also sexual attraction. If we are sexually attracted or we're turned on, we feel hot. We talk about a hot girl or a hot boy. If we see someone who is attractive, we might sweat, we might get red, get embarrassed, vasodilate. So we're behaving as if we're hot. Hot girls make us feel hot. In contrast, sexual disinterest leaves us cold. We use words like frigid or stone cold. It gives you a shiver down your spine. So disinterest makes you cold. Anger, that makes you hot. You get hot under the collar. You get worked up. You see red. Fear, that makes you cold, makes you shiver, makes you shake. You get goosebumps. Your hair stands on end. All these things and more, like happiness for instance, put us in the pink. Give us a warm glow. Make us feel warm. And all these things and more things like sadness make us feel cold, make us feel blue. The brain, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, the amygdala, the pituitary, it doesn't distinguish between these things. When we are saying we are firmly comfortable, it's so much more than just the physical temperature of the air. So your skin, which is roughly 7% of your body weight and contains roughly 8% of your blood, measures the heat rate at which heat enters or leaves your body. And by varying the amount of blood in the skin, we can also, to an extent, control the rate at which heat enters or leaves your body. Most of the heat transfer is by radiant heat. We tend to control temperatures in rooms and buildings by measuring the air temperature. In actual fact, the air temperature is not one of the things that figures in our comfort. It's loosely related to our comfort, but it's not a primary factor. So let's have a look at the primary things that affect how we feel comfortable, or the things that can make us uncomfortable. The first one is the mean radiant temperature. This is roughly the average temperature of all the objects or surfaces in a space. The temperature contribution of each individual surface is weighed by its area. So what we're doing here is we're not measuring the air temperature, we're measuring the radiant temperature, we're measuring the amount of infrared. Now you might say that's the same as the room temperature, but it's not strictly. The air temperature in a room is created by thermal currents and by conduction. There is a radiant element to it. Essentially what this is saying is the room air temperature might be perfectly comfortable, but if you have a very large window and that window is very, very hot, then you will feel uncomfortably hot because of the radiation from that window. Another factor which affects our heat generation and our level of comfort is our activity level. If we are active, what we take to be a comfortable temperature increases. And if we are inactive, the comfortable temperature level decreases. We'll be talking about this a little bit later when we talk about the metabolic rate. Clothing can seriously affect our comfort level. Here we have two people, and the left hand is a child, obviously dressed for the cold. And what they've done is they've dressed in layers, which traps air, creates thermal insulation, and keeps the child warm. On the right we have Lawrence of Arabia. He's dressed for the hot, and he's wearing loose-fitting cotton clothes which allow perspiration, and it's also white, which reflects the radiant heat away. Air velocity affects heat transfer, but moving air always cools. If you are cold and someone blows hot air at you, you will not feel warmer. You may get warmer, but you'll not feel warmer. Also, we are very badly affected by drafts. We hate drafts. If you sit in a draft, especially on the back of your neck, you will feel uncomfortable. Humidity does have an effect on comfort. It affects the evaporation and the cooling rate. So especially when you're sweating, then the humidity will have a big difference. If it's very, very humid, your sweat won't evaporate, so you won't cool down. Interestingly enough, it's humidity that governs what is and is not habitable area. If the wet bulb temperature rises above, say, 38 degrees, then death will occur, because you're not able to cool yourself by sweating. Air temperature. This does have an effect on comfort. Not as big an effect as, say, radiant temperature, but it does have an effect. Now, what we perceive as a comfortable air temperature varies according to where we live. If you live in a cold country, then when I was living in the UK, 18 degrees was considered a perfectly acceptable room temperature if it was cold. But if you live in, say, Darwin, then they would start feeling cold if the room temperature was at 26. In Perth, where I live now, the ideal room temperature is around about 23.5 degrees. Vertical temperature difference. This is important. We prefer to have warm feet and cool heads. This is how we should air condition a room. We should send cold air in at the bottom and take hot air out at the top. Of course, that's not what we do. We put cold air in at the top, and we generally let the hot air bleed out from underneath doors and that sort of thing. Or we have some sort of means of taking the hot air out. Once again, at the top, we're not maintaining the temperature difference that we want. So this is our ideal vertical temperature difference. And it varies according to various things like summer and winter. And that brings up an important point. We are animals that live in the real world, our ideal temperature varies with the seasons. In the summer, we tend to lose weight and maybe shed a little bit of hair. In the winter, we tend to put on a bit of fat and get a little bit more hair. Our body adapts to the seasons. We make a serious mistake when we maintain a room at 22.5 degrees every day of the year. The body doesn't want that. Another big factor in how we perceive comfort and how we perceive temperature, of course, is colour. As I've mentioned before, red makes you feel warmer. And of course, blues and greens make you feel cooler. We could easily reduce the air conditioning cost in an office if you just painted the walls different colours according to the seasons. Crowding will change our comfortable temperature reading. When we're in a crowd, what we perceive as comfortable temperature increases. And when we're by ourselves, it decreases. Age is a very important factor. Our comfortable temperature increases by about 1 degree every 40 years, so that old people like it a lot warmer than young people. And also their tolerance for thermal extremes is much less. The body temperature is regulated by lots of organs, and those organs basically start deteriorating as we get old. One very important factor is that babies should be kept cool. Now, I copied this straight out of the website so that I would get this correct. A newborn baby should be kept between 16 degrees and 20 degrees. Now, that's very cold by our standards. We always used to have this idea that we should wrap babies up and keep them warm. That's actually not healthy at all. Women differ from men in thermal responses to heat load and heat loss, as well as to endogenous heat load during exercise. Because they usually have a larger ratio of body surface to body mass, a greater amount of fat, and lower exercise capacity. I'm quoting this, but this is the average figures. Don't shoot me. Don't shoot the messenger. When these differences are eliminated in experimental studies, it appears that women's sweating response to heat load is still smaller than that of men, but they are able to maintain their core body temperatures on a similar level to that of men as a result of greater evaporative efficiency of sweating. In addition, the changing rate of sex hormone release during the menstrual cycle modifies thermoregulation in women. So there are differences in resting body temperature and thermal responses to positive or negative heat loads depending on the phase of the cycle. Changes in thermoregulation in young women taking oral contraceptives and those associated with the menopause and hormonal replacement therapy. So, not being sexist, just telling it as it is, especially with women, their perception of heat changes with their monthly cycle. And especially if they're going into menopause, they can completely lose the ability to judge temperatures. As a result of this, females are less satisfied with room temperatures than males. They prefer higher room temperatures than males and feel both uncomfortably cold and uncomfortably hot more often than males. Although females are more critical of their thermal environment, males use thermostats in households more often than females. That's how it is. Noise can have a huge effect on our comfort level. We may have a room where we've got it set up absolutely thermally perfect. If there's a constant annoying hum in the corner, maybe a computer or a noisy fan, then the people in that room will feel uncomfortable and will complain about the air conditioning. Pulsations in airflow, drafts in other words, seriously affect our comfort. It peaks at 2 Hertz. That's quite low frequency. So anything happening about 2 Hertz will really, really piss us off. So here's the equation. Somebody came up with an equation for the energy loss from the body. So we lose energy. Basically, we get energy from our metabolism. We take sugars, we take fats, and we burn them in our bodies. Within our bodies, it's deliberately inefficient in that we not only create work, we also create heat. Now that heat is lost by things like respiration. We breathe out and heat comes out. It's lost by evaporation. We sweat and the heat comes out. It's lost by conduction, where we touch things, by convection, but as I said before, mostly it's lost by radiation. To calculate the radiation loss, we need to know the surface area of the body. And that's what this chap calculated, Monsieur Dubois. He calculated the Dubois area of the body. And this is a dreadful equation, but basically if you know the mass and the height of the person, you can roughly calculate their skin area. Looking back at this equation, we have a value S, which is the total heat. What we're saying is when the heat leaving the body exactly equals the heat being generated by the body, then we're in thermal homeostasis. So we should be thermally comfortable. Now, part of this is regulated by the amount of work we are doing. And we measure this using a new unit called the metabolic equivalent, or MET for short. We normally say that we're running around about somewhere between 1 and 10 METs. And here's the equation which relates that to kilojoules. So we're saying 1 MET is equivalent to 4.184 kilojoules per kilogram hour. Okay? So let's have a look at what METs are. Essentially, sitting down relaxing, not doing very much, you're running around about 1 MET. That's watching the TV. If you're doing anything that involves any brain activity, it'll be going up to 1.5 MET because your brain takes a bit of energy. If you're walking around, 2.3. Walking briskly, 2.9 MET. Cycling 3, up to a high of, say, sexual activity, 5.8 MET. And then when you get really vigorous, jumping a rope, 10 MET. You're using 10 times as much energy skipping than you are sitting down watching the TV. Another factor in this calculation, the horrible equation, is how quickly we lose heat via radiation. To calculate this, we need to take into account our clothing. Now there's several clothing standards. They're the R value, which we use commonly when we're calculating insulation values for, say, thermal insulation for the ceiling. There's also a value that's used in Europe called the TOG. But the SI value, the commonest value, if you like, is the CLO value, which stands for clothing. Now, essentially, one set, what you do is you take each bit of clothing, and each bit of clothing has a CLO value. A shirt has 0.19, underpants has 0.04, trousers 0.11. And you add all the CLO values, and it gives you an overall CLO value for that set of clothing. A set of casual clothes, so long trousers, long sleeve shirt, maybe a sweater or t-shirt, socks and shoes, has a CLO value of around about 1. So your average casual clothes is a value of 1. So here's some tables showing you some different sets of things. Pyjamas, say a set of 0.96. Slippers, no socks. Sweatpants, 0.74. Shorts, short sleeve shirts, 0.36. Much less insulation value. Okay, now, what is interesting is that once we start putting on a suit jacket and a shirt and tie, our CLO value goes up. In fact, a businessman in a full business suit with a jacket and a suit and a tie will have a CLO value of around 2. Now, why that's interesting is that when you look at historically the temperatures we set our rooms to, we set our rooms to 22.5. Now, I said to you before, in Perth, the ideal temperature is 23.5. The reason we set it at 22.5 is to suit a businessman wearing a suit jacket and a tie. We could save hundreds of thousands of dollars in air conditioning if people stopped wearing jackets and ties. And we could set our room temperature to 23.5. So here's some more, you see. This is showing long underwear, thermal underwear, increasing our CLO value. Now, we put all these values together in this horrible equation, and we can use this to work out what's called the predicted mean vote. And the predicted mean vote basically is this number, and it tells you whether the people are warm or cold. It's a statistical function. It's, to be honest, truly horrible equation. Here's the equation for the predicted mean vote. So you take the total energy, well, here it is. It's just awful. Now, using the predicted mean vote, we can then calculate the next thing, which is the predicted percentage dissatisfied. Or in other words, how many people in the building are unhappy with the temperature. And there is the equation for that. And this just goes beyond a horrible equation. Using these equations, we can do some predictions. We can look at an average building and we can predict. We can say, what would happen if we changed the air temperature in that building from, say, 22.5 to 23.5? How many people would become unhappy? And then we can do things like, say, what happens if we get everybody to take their suit and tie off? And we can see how many people then become happy. So we can do this to predict how we can change room temperatures. Now, these equations are truly horrible, and I wouldn't expect you to do them. Luckily, we don't need to, because we live in the future, and we have the interweb. Here's a link of one site where you can put in all the things and it'll calculate your predicted mean vote and percentage of people dissatisfied. So you can play with different clothing levels. You can play with different air temperatures. You can play with different Met values and see if we can make people happy using less energy. Here's another site run by Berkeley, and this one uses a chart which you might be more familiar with, and you can, once again, you can change the clo level, you can change the airspeed, because of course drafts make you feel uncomfortable. So these are great ways of predicting whether people are happy or unhappy. So that's the end. Well, I'm back, he said.